Welcome.
Sure. Thank you, Darcy, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Um, my name is Kaitlin Brown. I am the Senior Director of Programs and Services with the Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling. So for those who might not be familiar with the Connecticut Council, I don't think I recognize anybody's names yet that I've seen. So I'm very excited to be talking to a new audience. But the Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling is a nonprofit organization here in Connecticut. Our mission is to prevent gambling-related harm, and we do so through prevention initiatives, advocacy, outreach, education and training opportunities like today, as well as facilitate the 24/7 problem gambling helpline. So we do that by call, chat, and text. So anyone who's worried about their gambling or the gambling of someone that they care about can call our helpline anytime, and we connect them to all different kinds of resources. A little bit of my background is I am a licensed professional counselor as well as a licensed alcohol and drug counselor, internationally certified gambling counselor. I hold an international gaming disorder certificate, as well as a board-approved clinical consultant. And what that means, that's all with the International Problem Gambling and Gaming Certification Board. So I have dedicated my career to working with those individuals who have been negatively impacted by gambling. I've worked in treatment programs, which is where I first met Stephen, and I've been with the council as their director of programs and services for almost 8 years. So I oversee pretty much anything that happens around gambling prevention in the state. So I will turn it over to my colleague Stephen to introduce himself. Thank you.
Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. Nice, like Kaitlin, I'm excited to see all the folks we don't know and all new faces on here. So that's really we really try to spread the word about gambling and talk about the work we do. So all these new faces can do can talk about it now. But I'm Stephen Matos. I work for MCCA. It's the Better Choice Gambling Treatment Program there. So MCCA is Midwestern Connecticut Council of Alcoholism, and we're based in Western Connecticut in Waterbury and Danbury. I also oversee the gambling statewide recovery support grant, and I'll talk more about that later with the slides and get into more of the specifics of my program with some slides after. Like Kaitlin, I'm an internationally certified gambling counselor, an international gambling recovery specialist, and all these new things now, board approved recovery advisor, the newest thing. And again, I'm certified in Connecticut as a recovery sports specialist, which also means I am a person in long-term recovery. I've been in recovery from substances and gambling, and also a person affected from gambling, having a family history of it for over 38 years. So besides being a gambling counselor, and I do have that lived experience aspect. If anybody wants to ask any questions afterwards, or during the thing there, we're pretty informal. Put it in the chat, and we'll probably have some time at the end as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, so I was going to say, if anybody has questions, please feel free to interrupt us. You can come off of mute and ask the question. Don't feel like you have to wait until the end, or you can put it in the chat. Also comments, and Darcy will be monitoring that for today. I also wanted to let everyone know, if you would take a moment to put in the chat, since I don't know any of you, your name, what your role is in your organization, and what has been your experience working with individuals that are either diagnosed with gambling disorder or anyone who has shared any of their gambling related experiences with you in a clinical setting. And if anybody is feeling brave today and wants to come off mute and share, happy to hear that too.
Anne-Marie Lucas over here in Torrington, clinic supervisor. I don't have much experience with gambling treatment. I know that it's something that we've offered here at Root Center for a while, so definitely very interested to hear the different modalities and how we can apply that with our clinical sessions.
Thank you. Anybody else?
You have two people. Elizabeth says, I was part of a grant program in Southeastern Connecticut using art as a tool for problem gambling awareness. And Heather says, no experience with gambling addiction. Karen O'Connor says, Rushford, Briley, they're going on and on. Do you want me to read through them all?
No, you don't have to read them all, but I'll go through and we'll read them
Okay,
after.
good.
But thank you for participating. We're going to try to make it as interactive as we can, so that you're not just listening to us talk for an hour and a half. My other disclaimer is I talk very quickly, and we're going to provide a lot of information in this hour and a half. I will send out the slides, so don't feel like you have to write down every word or take pictures of every slide. I'll send and share all the resources, and happy to give you more information and resources after the presentation as well. So today we are going to be talking a lot about gambling. So there could be gambling imagery included in this presentation. I am very aware that this can be triggering for many people. We may have people in the audience that are struggling with being in recovery from gambling themselves, or maybe they're just having issues with gambling. So at any time, I want to make sure that you are taking care of yourself. If you need to take a break, if you need to take turn your camera off, if you need to send me a private message and we can talk afterwards, happy to do that. But please make sure you take care of yourself. And then because there are CEUs attached to today's training, we do have some learning objectives. So we're going to be talking about the landscape of gambling and what that looks like here in Connecticut, how it's changed over the last couple of years, describe the progression from gambling, from recreational gambling or social entertainment forms of gambling to what gambling disorder looks like, and then talk a lot about different resources that are in our community that are gambling informed. Oh, Stephen, you're on mute.
Sorry, I was coughing. I muted myself. So these are some of the definitions we like to use when we're talking about gambling. So gambling is risking something of value on an uncertain outcome. And then gaming is playing electronic games, whether through consoles, computers, phones, etc. Now, you may hear in the news when they're talking about gambling at the casino or the legislatures, they use the term gaming, and what they're referring to is gambling. It's more of an industry term. So these are just kind of clarify that with this slide here. So. And again, here's some other definitions. Responsible gambling, you might hear about that in some of the work we do, especially with our resource van, and we'll talk more about that later. But taking steps to reduce risks or harms that it can occur when gambling. Problem gambling is a pattern of gambling engagement that is so extreme it causes an individual to have important problems in various aspects of their life. And then gambling disorder is the clinical term related to a score assessed by a professional using the recognized set of criteria. So that's when people do come to our program, that's the term that we will use, gambling disorder. It's kind of evolved over the years from pathological gambling to compulsive gambling to gambling disorder.
Thanks, Stephen. And I'm going to show a video. I'm hoping that it's going to play. If I can just get a thumbs up once it's going to make sure that everybody. All right. I know this is always the tricky part.
In Sin City. So how did we get here?
The future of sports gambling in America is about to change in a big way.
In 2018, the Supreme Court overturned the federal ban on sports betting and said any state that wants to offer sports betting can offer it. And it became a boon for the sports industry.
It used to be something you did bootleg, underground, through bookies named, Doc and Jimmy and Crooked Nose Bob. Now it's a legitimate form of entertainment, like going to a game, going to a movie.
This has been the single largest expansion of gambling that our nation has ever undergone. I don't think we can actually comprehend how fast this thing came to fruition.
15, 20 years ago, you could come out to Las Vegas and that was really the only choice that a consumer had. When you look at today's world, everything's at the touch of their fingertips on their mobile phone or on their computer.
It's instant access. It gives someone the ability to just click with the money you have in your account. It's a pretty seamless experience.
This legalization of sports gambling, how has it changed the way that people bet on sports?
What's amazing now is that all the activity is not on the outcome of the game, right? It's all the prop bets of how many yards are going to be thrown. You know, what's the temperature going to be in the Kansas City-Miami game?
Let's take a look at a same game parlay that we're going to build together. I'm going to do the first leg. What this means is we combine 2 or more bets into one within the same game.
In the last few years, the proliferation of in-game betting, that's become commonplace.
Why do people want to bet in-game?
You can be reacting to what's happening in real time.
Donovan Edwards racing to the end zone.
And feel like you've got an edge. And then again, once you've got, skin in the game, it just makes it that much more exciting to watch the rest of it.
Okay, so as I'm stopping sharing the screen and getting back to the PowerPoint, feel free to put in the chat any comments on the video, or come on mute and let me know what your thoughts were. Are people aware of this? Is this new information?
Want me to go, Kaitlin?
No, I was waiting to see if anybody had any comments about the video.
Nothing in the chat. Somebody did just write the online gaming seems very enticing.
Yes, and that's on purpose. So we'll talk about that a little bit more as we move in, but feel free to continue to put things in the chat. So for some of you, you may know this information, some of this might be new to you, but in 2021, we had the biggest gambling expansion in Connecticut since the opening in the early 90s of both of our 2 largest casinos. So with that expansion brought online casinos, online sports betting, online fantasy sports, and actually online lottery should have been updated because that's already been here for about like 9 months now. So you do have the ability to purchase lottery tickets online with a credit card. So that was a new thing as well. So that also increases the risk. I'll turn over to Stephen to talk about different types of gambling.
Sure. So these are some of the types of gambling we see in Connecticut. The lottery, we have lottery's been around since the early 70s in Connecticut. It certainly has grown from daily numbers to scratch tickets to Powerball, Mega Millions, Play 4, Play 5, and then more recently, about 5 years ago, Keno came online, which is a numbers game. You've probably seen it maybe in some of the bars or restaurants. They have a big number thing on the wall with 80 numbers on it, and you pick a certain amount of numbers and you wager a certain amount of money, and the game turns over every 4 minutes on the screen there. Even though and then at the convenience stores where the lottery terminals are at, you still can play Keno where they don't have the screen. So it is a popular game, and it's exceeded expectations as far as the lottery goes when it rolled it out. And again, casinos, we have 2 of the biggest casinos in the country, Foxwoods, Mohegan Sun. We have one north of the border there in MGM. We have Rhode Island, and then New York has a few of them as well. And again, sports betting, fantasy sports, you just saw the video. Fantasy sports is something that's been around for many years, but now it used to be season long. Now they have daily fantasy sports on almost every type of sporting event, and again, wagering on that. Online gambling, we just talked about that. Off-track betting, which is our OTBs. You'll probably see them scattered around the state. They're called Winners Cafes. Some of the sports books have them as well, where you can, again, betting the horses. Stock market and day trading are forms of gambling. Charitable games. So charitable games could be a raffle, a church bingo, those type of activities. Cryptocurrency, a newer thing. There are cryptocurrency online casinos. Cryptocurrency itself is volatile when purchasing it or investing in it. It does fluctuate. It is like investing, and it is again being volatile. And video games, which is a whole nother training we do on video gaming. A lot of the video games today have an element of gambling built in, with loot boxes and skins and in-game purchases on those things as well. So, and again, gambling is on a continuum from a no gambling, social gambling to serious social, and then we get to the tip of the spear there, where 3 to 4% are, is problematic. And remember the slide on the definitions what problem gambling look like. Excuse me. And again, gambling disorder, 1 to 2% of the population. And most recent study in Connecticut shows that it is 1.8% of the population. And Kaitlin will talk about those numbers on a slide in a minute. And then you'll see some bullet points at the bottom where it says youth 2 times. So youth are 2 times greater risk. Veterans are at 3 times greater risk. Athletes are at 4 times greater risk. And here's one that probably would apply to most of the folks that you work with. The substance use and mental health population are at 10 times greater risk. And, just quickly, one of the things that I do, I travel around to recovery centers, treatment programs. I talk to IOP groups, inpatient programs, residential programs, myself and my staff, and we share our lived experience of substance use and gambling and what that looks like. And you'd be surprised on how many people talk about their gambling experiences, that they never even talked about it before because no one ever brought it up. And on the other side of that coin is many people have been impacted by gambling and have experienced, trauma from a partner or a loved one, financial trauma, emotional trauma, even some domestic violence as a result of a loved one's gambling. And a lot of times when we do have these conversations and talking to these groups, again, the first thing we'll say, have you ever talked about that before? And they would say no, and we'll say, why? Well, no one ever brought it up. So these are good conversations to have when, Kaitlin will talk about some screening tools later on as well. And again, Department of Correction and criminal justice population are at 20 times greater risk.
Thanks, Stephen. And so thinking about those numbers and what that looks like for our small state in Connecticut. So, looking at 1.5 to 2% of the population meeting that diagnostic criteria for gambling disorder, that's approximately 65,109 individuals. So if you're a visual person, it's enough to fill Fenway Park over 1.5 times or Yankee Stadium once with a few people left standing. And then an additional 8% of the population is at risk of developing a problem with gambling at some point later in their life. And we'll also talk about risk factors. And that's over 289,000 Connecticut residents. So when we're looking at 1.5 to 2%, a lot of times people are like, oh, that's not that many people. It's a small percentage. But, a lot of people are being impacted negatively by gambling. And then according to the National Council on Problem Gambling, for every one person who's working through a gambling related challenge, they can impact between 7 and 20 other individuals. So that's what Stephen was talking about. It could be a loved one, family member, friend, coworker, community member. So then when you start, I always joke and say I'm a therapist, I'm terrible at math, but when you start to do the math and multiply 7 to 20 times these numbers, you get a better idea of really what is the impact that gambling harm has on our communities. And so this is a little bit about the DSM. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with the DSM. So gambling was originally categorized as an impulse control disorder back in the 80s, and it was termed pathological gambling. So if you do research or you do Google searches, the research will still usually use the word pathological gambling, but it was renamed gambling disorder back in 2013 when it was actually the first behavioral addiction and the only behavioral addiction that is still recognized in the DSM. It is found under other substance-related disorders. You used to need to meet 5 out of 10 criteria. They did remove one criteria, so now to be diagnosed, you have to meet 4 out of 9. So the one that they did remove was has committed illegal acts such as forgery, fraud, theft, or embezzlement to finance gambling. So although it's no longer a diagnostic criteria, we do find that there are people that we're working with in treatment that still do commit illegal acts to fuel their gambling. And this is the criteria. So again, remembering that you have to meet 4 out of 9 criteria here. So you can, if you, those of you who work with the substance use population, some of this might look very familiar, and Stephen's going to get into it in a little bit, comparing substance use disorders to gambling and also talking about some of the unique experiences with gambling. But you can see that there's preoccupation. We have the tolerance change, so needing to put increasing amounts to get the same level of excitement. Someone who might try to stop or cut back and can't control it on their own. You see the anxiety, the restlessness, the irritability when they are trying to stop gambling or decrease their use. Somebody who's gambling as a way to escape with their problems. So using gambling as a way of self-medication, coping skills, same way as someone might use substances. With gambling, we see chasing losses. So after someone gambles and loses money, they can often return another day to try to get even to get their money back. We see that they're hiding and lying the extent of their gambling to their family and friends, could jeopardize or lose a significant relationship, job, educational, or career opportunity, and then relying on others to provide money to relieve a desperate financial situation. In our field, we refer to those as bailouts. And I'll let Stephen talk a little bit about bailouts and why we don't recommend that in treatment.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, for those of you who don't know, bailouts are actually when someone's gambling. A lot of times we see when folks are really in trouble financially with gambling, they'll go to a family member, a loved one, friend, and ask for money to help them get out of this jam that they're in financially. It could be credit cards, could be a bookie, could be numerous things. And so what happens is when someone's bailed out, it kind of gives them a clean slate and it enables them to go gamble again. And so we actually recommend against that. And sometimes loved ones will do that a couple of times before they realize that doesn't work. So we certainly advise against it in our treatment programs. And we have other interventions to help manage that.
Thanks, Stephen. So this, if we were in person, we would do an interactive activity. So I'm just going to rely on people coming off of mute or putting it into the chat. These are cards. There's called the risk ranking activity. It's a set of 20 cards. If anybody after we talk about it is interested in having it, it's a great activity to use with clients. If you're running a staff meeting, just to get people having conversations about gambling. I can give the resource at the end. You can go to the Connecticut Clearinghouse and you can actually request to have decks of cards delivered to you, or you can go pick them up. But like I said, there's 20 different scenarios. So we're just going to do 2 for right now. So what I want you to do is tell me which one of these 3 scenarios do you think is the most risky? So we have A, living 40 miles from a casino, B, downloading sports betting apps on your mobile devices, or C, a 10-year-old winning $50 on the first scratch ticket ever given to them. Again, feel free to put it in the chat, or if anybody would like to come off of mute and share.
I'm debating between the second and the third one. If 5 years ago, I would have said the 10-year-old winning the scratch ticket, but I put in the chat earlier about the ease of the cell phone and how that's super concerning. So I would actually vote B, but I think C is a very close second.
Mm-hmm. And why would you pick C? What is it about the 10-year-old?
The age, the thrill, finding enjoyment in a very simple way, something the adults do, so it's cool. Maybe the older kids do it. Kind of exposing kids to cigarettes at a young age, drinking at a young age. It might fix feelings that they have that they didn't have coping skills for. A host of reasons.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you hit on a lot of different points. And like I said, we're going to talk about the risk factors. So the whole point of the activity is that they all have elements of risk, and we probably need more information, but it gets people talking. So if you were doing it in person, you would break people into groups, and each group would get a different set of 4 to 5 cards, and then they would process ranking it from high to low. What are our thoughts on living 40 miles from a casino?
Folks are saying dangerous, risk through the roof. Not far away.
Yeah, so the research actually showed, and this is an older statistic, but research showed that if you live within a 50-mile radius of a casino, the likelihood of you developing a gambling problem in your lifetime doubles. So exactly what Anne-Marie was talking about the ease of the cell phone and accessibility. So, it's kind of relevant, but also not when we're talking about accessibility and proximity, because now everybody has access to a casino in the palm of their hand with their cell phone. So I'm waiting for someone to do research to increase that stat of now that everybody has access to gambling gambling opportunities on their cell phone, what is the likelihood of them developing a gambling problem later in life? But a lot of times when we talk about this, people are like, oh, I have 40 miles is not that far. It's not a big deal. That just because you live there doesn't mean you're going. So it is interesting to hear the different perspectives based on people's experiences. All right, we're going to do one more. So again, whatever you think is the highest risk. A, high school football player who participates in 2 fantasy football leagues. B, buying a lottery ticket every time you pump gas. Or C, teenagers getting together once per month for poker nights.
All these, they thought.
Anybody want to come off mute and say why? Go ahead, Elizabeth.
So I think that it would be the high school football player. And my reason being is that once things become virtual, and especially once things become tied to your phone, the ease of access, especially when phones are linked to people's bank accounts and so much else, and there's data that these apps are grabbing. So you're going to get targeted marketing, you're going to get saturation. It's so much more easy and dangerous, and because of the person's age. Another thing is, as we know for athletes, with the NCAA regulations, if many of them are going to college, they could lose everything if they're caught with sports gambling. So, I think from my perspective that those fantasy leagues seem so harmless, but because of the virtualization, the digitalization, the connection to the phone with the connection to their bank account, targeted marketing, captive audience, and then the risk, they could lose everything. Not just, it's not just betting the money away, it's losing their sports careers, it's getting kicked out of college, which could potentially lead to more problem gambling. So
thank you. Yes, thank you for sharing all of that. Yeah, and I think, the high school, you brought up a lot of points about like the athlete, the age, the ease of access. One thing that is always debatable with fantasy football is that sometimes you can do it for money, sometimes it's free. Going back to like, what is the age, the legal requirement to be able to participate in fantasy sports is 18. So how old are these high school students? Are they doing it among friends? So again, right, we need more information. But yeah, definitely a risky behavior. Buying a lottery ticket every time you pump gas, I guess that really depends, right? So I work from home, so I don't use a lot of gas because I'm working at home. But my husband drives for a living, and sometimes he has to fill up 4 times a week. And so if he was purchasing a lottery ticket every time he pumped gas, it could be concerning, especially of what the dollar amount is on the ticket, right? So scratch tickets can range from $1. They even have a $50 scratch ticket. So if it was a $50 scratch ticket every time somebody pumped gas, right? That looks a little bit different than somebody going once a week to fill up their gas tank and buying, $2 worth of Powerball tickets or something like that, right? So again, level of risk, it's all on a continuum. And then the teenagers getting together once per month for poker night. Again, young people engaging in an activity. I think a lot of times parents are okay with this because they're like, oh, well, at least my kids are home. I know what they're doing. They're not using drugs. They're not drinking. They're just playing cards, right? So you don't know if it's for money, if it's not for money. And you don't know if one of those teenagers has additional risk factors that could lead to them developing a gambling problem later in life. So like I said, this is a great activity just to get people talking. There's 20 different scenarios. I'm happy to share the resource of where you can get it. And we have talking points with all the data. So definitely great to use if you are interested, or reach out to me afterwards and I can walk you through it.
And again, remembering the bullet points on the continuum slide as well. A lot of those groups are covered too, young people and athletes.
I'll let you keep going, Stephen.
Yep, and here's some of the risk factors that we do see. Early big wins. So there was we just saw with the young person buying a lottery ticket or receiving a lottery ticket. Accessibility, we've been talking about cell phones and gambling. Hold mistaken beliefs about the odds of winning. not monitoring gambling wins and losses, a recent loss or change in someone's life. Maybe they lost a loved one, retirement, empty nest. Many different things can cause that. Feelings of boredom, loneliness, history of risk taking or impulsive behavior, financial problems. Right, gambling is a way to solve problems. Like you need money to pay a bill, or maybe I'll go to the casino or buy a lottery ticket to try and win the money I need. um, Limited interest in hobbies or feel their lives lack direction, history of mental health problems, history of trauma, having a parent with a gambling problem, history of substance use, and history attributing self-esteem to gambling wins or losses. Like, in just a little bit about myself, just my own history, having had a parent with a gambling problem. My dad was a gambler. I have history of substance use, a couple things like that. So early big win, another risk that was, in my life. So just kind of just sharing that. And we see that with a lot of folks that we work with in my Better Choice program as well. And some of the warning signs of a problem developing, we see a lot of preoccupation of gambling is all the person thinks about, continues to gamble despite the problems or negative consequences, hiding or lying about their gambling. We call it the hidden addiction. Used to cope or escape risk or loss of relationships, spend more time and money gambling, unable to stop or reduce the gambling or behavior, no longer interested in other activities, work performance deteriorates due to preoccupation and trouble concentrating, unexplained absences, pay in lieu of vacation is requested. Organizing betting opportunities is a frequent activity. It could be Super Bowl parties, going into March Madness parties, then Kentucky Derby parties, or even just a Sunday party for football, those type of events. And coworkers arguing over borrowed money. And again, some betting in the workplace, wagering on the due date of a colleague who was pregnant, over and under on how long the meeting will last. It sometimes will show up in work. Purchasing lottery products with small groups of coworkers. I mean, I certainly seen it when I worked for the state for many years. People, buying lottery tickets for the whole office, and people, do you want to kick in? Do you want to kick in? And they have everybody buying in for the Powerball or whatever, big lottery game that was going on. Buying lottery tickets as gifts for colleagues. Um, social work outing at a casino. Raffling a basket full of lottery tickets for a work event, participating in fantasy sports league with coworkers where money is involved, betting on a sports game with a colleague, NCCA basketball tournaments where you can wager to fill out a bracket. We see a lot of that. We see the Super Bowl pools a couple weeks ago everywhere, even in the workplace. And again, the March Madness brackets, we do see a lot of that in workplaces. Again, paying or chipping in on Super Bowl squares, placing online sports bets during working hours, and researching horses during work time, which is what I used to do back in the day, reading the racing form. I'm showing my age. And then placing wagers online.
Yes, I think it's important to include this because I think so many people forget what actually counts as gambling. So especially in our helping fields, in the behavioral health field, like Stephen and I, where we used to work, we worked for a gambling specific treatment program that was housed in a behavioral health setting that did substance use and mental health work. And every year we had our end of the year Christmas holiday party. And we would go, and the first thing they do is hand you a raffle ticket. And now here Stephen and I are walking in together. I'm getting the raffle ticket, and he's like, no, I don't need the raffle ticket. And they're like, no, take the raffle ticket. And it puts him in an awkward situation. Not that he's embarrassed about his recovery, but he shouldn't have to disclose to everyone that he's in recovery for gambling at a work event. So I think of like when we're not using substances in work settings, we're not bringing alcohol to work. So why are we incorporating gambling events where somebody else could be potentially triggered? And we see this, Stephen, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit like with AA and NA, how they raffle off books. So even in self-help groups.
50-50 raffles, right? Even at recovery meetings. I see a lot of those at AA, NA meetings, AA or NA dances, things like that. The 50-50 raffles. And even like in my behavioral health program over the years, we'll see like clinicians throwing scratch tickets in the wastebasket for everybody to see, things like that, or leaving them on their desk, and their lottery tickets, which could be a trigger for some people, things like that, especially in not better choice clinicians, but certainly other mental health programs and that we're housed with.
Yeah, so just something to be mindful of. I know that there's a lot of nonprofit organizations that do fundraisers, right? And so a lot of times the fundraising activities are related to raffles or other gambling, like setback tournaments or whatever it may be. So just, again, something to be mindful of. Stephen, I'll have you keep going talking about what the brain looks like on substances versus gambling.
Sure, you can go. So yeah, so there's a lot of similarities with substances and gambling. It affects the same part of the brain. The midbrain activates the reward system, that dopamine release when someone's using a substance. With gambling, it's the same type of thing. I think we have a slide on that later, what the brain looks like. So when someone wins a bet gambling, they get that high or that dopamine hit, same as someone using a substance. The tolerance builds. So, with gambling, substance use, obviously you folks know the more someone uses a substance, the more frequent they use it, the larger doses. Well, the same with gambling. As the gambling progresses, it's more frequent and larger amounts of money to get the same effect. The prefrontal cortex weakens, and again, larger, stronger doses, loss of control, the preoccupation, personal life and relationships suffer, withdrawal. People can actually go through withdrawal from gambling. We do have a slide on that, Kaitlin. I think we'll talk about it. And repeatedly pursuing rewarding experience despite the negative consequences.
And here's the withdrawal side, Stephen, if you want to talk about it.
Oh, sure. So this withdrawal will look like from gambling, probably similar to someone maybe with a cocaine withdrawal or something like that. The physical symptoms will be nausea, stomach cramps, sweats, headache, intense cravings. Emotional will be the preoccupation, the restlessness, moodiness, irritability, and again, mental insomnia and depression and anxiety. And there are some medications that can help with that. We do prescribe, if appropriate, not that the APRN would, like naltrexone or Vivitrol can help with some of those cravings, intense cravings early on. And so what makes it different? So obviously with gambling, fantasies of success, what someone's going to do after that big win is all the great and wonderful things after that big win is finally made. There's no biological test, like with your program, someone comes in, they probably do a drug screen. We can't test for gambling. Unpredictable outcome. So with substances, someone's going to use a substance, they pretty much know what's going to happen. With gambling, you don't know what's going to happen on a turn of a card and the spin of the wheel, if they're going to get that win or that hit that number, whatever game they're playing, if they're going to get that, that rush or that feeling of a win. And not self-limiting. So with substances, you can only, drink so much or use so much of that substance before you pass out or overdose. With gambling, as long as the money flow is there, it can go on for days on end. We have one peer counselor that works for me. She talks about how she was at the casino on a slot machine for 72 hours. And we've heard, and over the years, Kaitlin and I have heard that story many times. Someone at a table or table game or a slot machine, for a couple days, or even to the point where they were taken out of there in an ambulance. So as long as that money flow is there, it can just keep going on and on and on. Behavior not attributed to intoxication. So when we see folks in that condition that have gambled for days, they're not making good decisions, and a lot of other crazy things are going on in their head, and more intense feelings of shame and guilt. Obviously, greater financial problems, less tolerance from the public and judicial system. So as you're learning here, all the similarities with gambling and substances. Well, the judicial system, and they're getting more informed, but it's been Kaitlin and I and some of our other colleagues, we do a lot of training with, the CSSD judges, support court, informing them the nature of the gambling, how it is similar to substance use, because we do see harsher sentences, like if someone stole money to get drugs, maybe they'll wind up in one, root program or my addiction program, MCCA, a diversionary program. If someone stole money to gamble, so we often see harsher sentences, because it's not viewed in the same way. And I've even had a judge ask me one day, saying, "You're saying, when I was testifying at a federal sentencing, the judge said, well, you're saying that, gambling is the same as substance use. And so you asked the wrong person that, obviously. So it's like, I went into my memorized slide presentation in my head. But anyway, it just goes to show how it's starting to change, but still there's a lot of folks out there that don't understand that. Can appear to be a money problem, intensity of family anger, and again, that less public awareness and greater stigma with the gambling.
Thanks, Stephen. I just want to add something because it came up yesterday. So I don't know if any of you have heard of Jody Bechtold, but she's a trainer and she's also a clinician out of Pennsylvania. She works with the Better Institute. So she's done a lot of different trainings for our organization and will continue to do trainings, but she's really focused on how to write letters for court, for judges to educate them. There's a whole screening tool about gambling motivated crime. So if people are interested in this topic, I'm happy to share, but she actually just posted on her LinkedIn last night, so I figured I'd share. She said, yesterday we won the fight. I was able to convince a judge that my client has a disorder that caused gambling motivated crime to be committed. The judge listened to me about alternative sentencing. We are making an impact. So it just goes to show the more that we continue to talk about this, we are making progress, even though it might be not as quickly as we would like to be making an impact, but people are starting to understand that gambling is a disorder that can take over someone's brain and allow them to do things that they wouldn't normally do if they were not under the influence. So here is a video. Again, I don't know if it's going to show. Hopefully it will, but this is through Brain Connections out of Canada. So happy to share the resources. They have worksheets and things that you could use with clients, but it talks about what's going on in the brain when someone is gambling.
Gambling. At first, it can feel a bit like getting behind the wheel of a new car. You're excited, confident, and in control. When you win, you feel on top of the world. There's nothing to worry about. So what's happening in your brain when you're gambling? The reward hub in your brain is like the gas pedal in your car. It gives the go signal to move towards what you want. The top-down control network is like the brakes in your car. It gives a signal to slow down or stop what you're doing. How you doing? Everything good? Addiction is like a communication problem between these gas and brake pedals. You keep pressing on the gas, but when it's time to stop, the brakes might not work. By the time you realize that gambling has become a problem, it can be difficult to stop. Gambling is now a habit. Habits are formed when brain activity shifts away from conscious control. You might feel like you're on autopilot. Once habit has taken over, you become very aware of gambling cues and triggers. Gambling isn't as fun, but you continue to do it to escape those uncomfortable urges caused by those triggers. As the consequences of your gambling get worse, so does your mood. At first, gambling has a positive effect on your mood, but in addiction, your natural mood set point drops. Over time, gambling becomes less pleasurable, and your set point lowers, even when you aren't gambling. It can lead to depression. Hey, are you worried about your gambling? This helped me, and it might help you. Have a look. The good news is that your brain is always changing, and you can reset your reward pathways. With help and support, you can stay motivated and develop a rich and meaningful life. For more information about the brain and problem gambling, visit brainconnections.ca. There is help. There is hope.
So again, that just is a little video just to give a quick introduction about what's going on in the brain. That's been useful to present with clients, either individually or in group that are having issues with gambling, just to kind of help them understand what's going on. So we're going to move into talking a little bit more about the brain and what's going on with the brain. So we know that with gambling, it's all about the dopamine reward system that's being impacted in the brain. So it's not necessarily about the money, but it's the action of the game and the hope or anticipation of winning. So I relate this to someone who might be using substances that obviously they're chasing the high of utilizing the substance, but also the whole procedure beforehand of like getting in the car, making the phone call, going to figure out where they're going to buy their drugs from, right? So it's like the whole ritual also releases dopamine. It's not just the action of the behavior. So dopamine is not released when expecting a loss, but it's flooded with dopamine when you're expecting a win. So here on the brain scans, you can see at the top, the little red dots is where your brain becomes flooded with dopamine when someone is gambling and winning. On the bottom is something called the near miss phenomenon. And so the same parts of the brain are being flooded with dopamine when someone experiences a near miss. And a near miss is what is shown on the image on the bottom. So if you're playing on a slot machine, you could get cherry bar. Most people would be like, oh, I lost. But for someone whose brain has been hijacked by gambling, it registers to them differently as an almost win or a near miss. So thinking that if I press that button one more time, I'm that much closer to getting cherry, when in reality, we know that every single spin of a slot machine or a roll of the dice is completely independent of one another. But our brain tricks us to think that we can predict the patterns of what's going to happen. So the gambling industry uses this in all different ways. So if you're thinking about the lottery tickets, if anyone's ever scratched a lottery ticket, you might scratch and get 5,000, and you're scratching and you see a 5 and you're like, this is it. And then it's $5, right? And you're like, oh, so close, but didn't win. So some people would be more likely to go back out and buy another lottery ticket. Others would just throw it in the trash like me and be like, okay, I'm never going to win this. And at the casino, if anybody's ever been to the casino, they have the roulette wheel. So they do show on the screen how many times it's been black, how many times it's been red. Because if it's been red 5 times in a row, we could expect that it's going to be red because red is hot, or we can convince ourselves that it's going to be black because black is due. And we do know that mathematically, there's a 50-50% chance of what it would come out, but our brain tends to trick us. And so gambling, for anybody who's ever taken a psychology course at any point in their career, you probably remember B.F. Skinner and his rat boxes. So this is how gambling works. It works on an intermittent reward schedule, meaning that you do not get a reward every time. So you don't only not know when the win is going to happen, we also don't know what the magnitude of that win is going to be, which continues to keep someone in the cycle of gambling because somebody's got to win. Why wouldn't it be me? And we also do know that the more immediate the gratification or the more rapid the speed of play, the more addictive the behavior is. So for those who work with substances, we do know that there are certain substances that are more addictive than others. So slot machines have actually been referred to as the crack cocaine of gambling because of how quickly each spin happens. And so when we're talking about this idea of shortening the reward schedule, humans are constantly looking for instant gratification. We say with gambling, it's low effort for high reward. And so on the one hand here, we see delayed. So these are different types of gambling that are more traditional. So we used to have season-long fantasy sports. You would create your fantasy team. You'd have to wait all the way till the end of the season to find out if your team won or lost. So it's more of like a long-term reaction of getting your reward or getting that dopamine blast. Traditional sports betting, you have to watch the whole game to find out who won or lost. Daily, nightly lottery, again, you're buying your ticket. You have to wait till they call the numbers. Live casino, you're getting in your car and driving somewhere. Investing is more long-term. And then traditional video games, I am of the generation who used to play Donkey Kong and Super Mario Brothers. So you're going through the levels. You have to beat the bad guy to save the princess, but it's more of a longer-term investment. Now we're seeing that different types of gambling opportunities are a much more immediate reward schedule. So no longer we're season fantasy sports enough. Now we have daily fantasy sports. So you can make a team for every single game that happens every single day of every week throughout the entire season. We see in-play sports wagering, which the video showed. So you don't necessarily have to just make your bet before the game happens. You can continuously make bets throughout the game as you're watching and change those bets if you feel like you're not going to win or you want to be a little more risky. We have scratch tickets, instant win, and Keno. So again, very instant. Keno is a new game every 4 minutes. We have online casino games and slot machines. Again, access 24/7 at the palm of your hand. Day trading. Some of you might have heard of apps like Robinhood. So more immediate reward schedule. So it's not something that's long-term. And then, like Steven said, this could be a whole other training. So if people are interested, we're happy to come back and talk more about video games. But loot boxes are like mystery crates or backpacks or different kinds of boxes that you can either earn in video games, or you can use physical world money to purchase them. They work on the same mechanics as a slot machine. So you're using money to hopefully gain something of value that's going to help you in the game or make you look cooler. But in reality, you're probably going to get an item that you already have 100 of that no one cares, and you're just going to continue to open it. So it works like a slot machine and is totally random. No guarantee of what you're going to win. And we also do know that there is a co-occurring nature. So Stephen did a great job talking about the similarities and the differences between substances. And he did share that people with mental health and substance use disorders are especially vulnerable to developing a problem with gambling. You know, they are at 10 times greater risk. So of people who have gambling disorder, 73% also report a co-occurring alcohol use disorder. So this is what we're seeing, the primary substance of use among people that have gambling disorder is alcohol. 38% report another substance use disorder. 60% report nicotine dependence. 50% have reported experiencing a mood disorder. 41% report an anxiety disorder, and a little over 60% report a personality disorder. So we do see that it is high rates of co-occurring nature here. And up to 50% of individuals in treatment for gambling disorder have had suicidal ideation, with about 17% of them attempting suicide. So gambling actually has the highest suicide rate of any addiction. And Stephen, do you want to talk a little about the next bullet point about the spouses? You're on mute.
Yeah, so spouses, you know, Kaitlin and I work with a lot of family members over the years, and she actually helps us out sometimes and speaks for us. And, you know, we always talk about the high suicide rates with folks that have gambling disorder. But she said, well, what about the family members? So we did a little deep dive into that to try to find out some statistics. And so, because she said she felt like, you know, suicidal at one point as a result of her loved ones gambling. And again, we found out that suicide rates are 3 times higher than the general population with family members of, you know, people with gambling disorders. So that's pretty eye-opening. And, you know, just one of the things that you see the co-occurring rate with the, you know, you folks, you work with the substance use and mental health population. I can't stress enough, if you could have someone to come in to, like I do it a lot, or my staff does a lot. A lot of us have, you know, gambling and substance use background. My recovery sports specialist to work for me. We go to a lot of treatment programs, and when folks just go, our people just go in there and share their story, you know, at a group, or it's unbelievable how many folks talk about gambling. I mean, it's so eye-opening. It's more often than not, it's a third to half of the folks have had significant gambling experiences, challenges, or affected by gambling. So again, I can't, and really one of the ways to get them to talk about, certainly, you know, you folks could, or having someone come in with lived experience and sharing their own stuff, that really jumpstarts them and gets them to talk about stuff that they never talked about before, especially this co-occurring stuff in gambling. So.
Thanks, Stephen. So I'm going to provide just a few screening tools. There's a lot of them out there. So again, if people want more information, please feel free to reach out to me after the presentation, and I'm happy to direct you to other resources. But I'm not sure what you all do as part of your assessment. And if you want to put it in the chat, if you do have questions about gambling, how many, what questions do you ask? But if you are thinking about starting to integrate some gambling related questions into your assessment or screening, these are some suggestions. So this is a quick one. This is the brief biosocial gambling screen. So it's just 3 questions. Looks at the last 12 months. So it's saying, have you become restless or irritable or anxious when you stop or cut down on gambling? Have you tried to hide your gambling, or have you lied to your friends and family about how much you've been gambling? And then did you have such financial trouble that you had to get help from friends? So again, speaking to that bailout about the financial concern. So those are 3 quick questions if you don't have a lot of time. I always sound super nerdy when I say this, but this is my favorite gambling screen. I don't know how many other people have a favorite gambling screen, but this is mine. I really do like the Problem Gambling Severity Index, which is the PGSI. So it's 9 questions. Again, it measures in the last 12 months. But this goes right off of the 9 criteria for gambling disorder. So I think it helps to identify if the person is likely to have a gambling disorder, or maybe they're just at risk of developing a gambling disorder. So they ask a lot of different questions, right? Have you bet more than you could afford to lose? Have you needed to gamble with larger amounts? So speaks to tolerance. Did you go back? Do we see the chasing of losses? Are you borrowing money? Did you ever think you had a gambling problem, or did anybody ever tell you you had a gambling problem? Has gambling caused you any health problems, including anxiety, depression? Have other people criticized your betting? How has your gambling caused any financial problems for you or your household? And then have you felt guilty about the way that you gamble, or what happens after you gamble? And so then there's a scoring tool at the end that says, 0, no problem with gambling. 1 to 2 would be low. 2 to 6, 7 would be moderate, and then 7 to 9 would be severe. I would say those individuals would be most likely meeting the diagnostic criteria. There's also this one that this is a longer scale, but this is that the client would do themselves. This can be helpful to do early on in the first assessment, and then maybe again in 6 months. So indicate by circling the extent to which you agree with this statement. So this kind of talks about the motivation of why someone is gambling. So that's really helpful in a clinical setting to figure out what is it that gambling does for this person in their life. So yeah, maybe they enjoy the excitement, maybe it's an escape, but maybe there's other underlying motivations and it's filling a different need for many different people. So one would be gambling makes me happier. I can't function without gambling. I collect specific objects that help increase my chances of winning. So that goes along with one of the cognitive distortions about superstitions. There are times that I feel lucky and thus gamble those times only. I will never be able to stop gambling. If I keep changing my numbers, I have less chance of winning than if I keep the numbers the same. So it just kind of talks to the different cognitive distortions and what goes on to with someone's brain when they are gambling. So this can be really helpful information moving forward with the treatment plan and as you continue with treatment with clients that are diagnosed with gambling disorder. Stephen, I'll let you talk about this.
Sure. So I know probably many of you have attended an AA meeting or NA meeting as part of your training, becoming clinicians, so what another 12-step program is Gamblers Anonymous. I'm sure you've heard of it. So there are a lot of similarities with the 12 steps are changed from obviously from alcohol or drugs to gambling. But one of the things that goes on at a Gamblers Anonymous meeting is, first of all, most of the meetings are closed. So if you wanted, if for one of you wanted to go to a Gamblers Anonymous meeting, you'd have to get permission from someone at the group. They'd have to take a group conscious and see if they would allow you to come. There's a couple, like one of the group that I attend is an open meeting in Wallingford, so you wouldn't have to do that. But just putting that out there. So part of what someone, if you work with someone and you were going to say, well, suggest a Gamblers Anonymous meeting, well, just a little insight to that. They do have 20 questions. They have their own screening tool there. So if someone goes to a GA meeting for the first time, the chairperson will take them on the hallway, explain the process of the meeting, what it's like. And at some point in time during the meeting, they're going to be asked the 20 questions of Gamblers Anonymous in front of everybody, and they have to answer no to yes or no to each one of the questions. So you'll see there's some similarities to some of the other screening tools that we do use. This is a little more intensive. It gets pretty specific, missing time from work or school due to gambling. I'm not going to read them all. You can read them on here, but one of the things I want to highlight is the last one, question number 20, and it said, "Have you ever considered suicide or self-destruction as a result of your gambling?" And that's and many people, going back to the other slide, we talked about the suicide rates. Many people do say yes to that question. And this is a pretty difficult thing for new people. People come to Gamblers Anonymous, things aren't going good in their life, so they're probably pretty emotional in attending this and then being asked these questions. So it can be a heavy duty experience, for folks that do go to Gamblers Anonymous. I mean, they're good at welcoming the people and being empathetic and all that, which is a good thing. But it can be very intense. And again, it said most compulsive gamblers they'll give them their score. They'll say most of compulsive gamblers will answer yes to at least 7 of these questions. And more often than not, many people, if they only answer 10 or 12 or 13, within a few weeks, they're saying, oh, geez, they answer more. Not that they're asked them again, but they'll realize that there were probably a lot more yeses than they like thought for instance, even the crime one, have you ever committed an illegal act? Most people say no, because most people haven't. But did you ever write a bad check, right? Did you ever write a check with no money in the account? So that's actually an illegal act if you want to, get down to it. So little things like that. But and again, it is a good fellowship. There's not as many of them as there are AA and NA. There's probably about 22 of them in Connecticut. There's virtual options and they're in person as well. So it is a good support group though for folks, wanting to get help.
And so next, we're just going to highlight some of the next steps. So I have some data talking about professional workforce development, how you might be able to get involved if this information is interesting to you, some of our exciting initiatives in the field, and then lots and lots of resources. So like I said, you will all have access to the slides. So recently, back in 2024, we did have a Connecticut prevalence study. So it is a legislative mandate that we do an impact prevalence study once every 10 years. So the one prior to 2024 was completed in 2009. So we were well overdue. And obviously the landscape in Connecticut had changed significantly from 2009 to 2024 with all the multiple increased opportunities for gambling. So what came out of this study is said that the people that are gambling stated that they're more likely to gamble to escape or relieve stress, compete for the challenges, or feel good about themselves. And then of all the issues that they have said that the people that had gambling problems here in Connecticut, what was the highest scoring problem that they were experiencing related to their gambling? So at 62.7%, people were saying mental health problems. 51.6% said financial problems, 30% relationship problems, 19, almost 20% work per school performance problems. 16.7% were reporting engaging in illegal behavior, and then 10% were reporting physical health problems. This whole impact study, I want to say, is like well over 100 pages, but it can be found at the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services Problem Gambling Services website. If anybody is interested in learning more about it, we have the resource at the end. I said in my introduction, we do facilitate the only helpline here in Connecticut for people that are experiencing gambling problems. So this is a little bit of our data from 2024. So approximately 70% of our callers were referred to Better Choice Gambling specific treatment programs. So like Stephen works in, there's 5, he'll talk about them as well. So depending if you're not in the Manchester area, you might have a different Better Choice program if you're in a different town. We talk a lot about different demographics. It is a confidential helpline, so we're only obtaining the information that the person who's calling is willing to give us. So sometimes that's limited. Sometimes they reach out to us and just say, can you tell me where the closest GA meeting is to me? And maybe it's in Wallingford. And I'm like, oh yeah, tomorrow night, 7 o'clock. And then they don't give us any other information. Sometimes people are giving us their entire life story in the first 5 minutes of the phone call. We track what type of gambling. So still casino type of gambling, whether in person or online, is still the #1 reason why people are calling saying that they have problems. Online specifically is our second highest, with sports being the third. So remembering that prior to 2021 in Connecticut, sports betting and online sports and online casino were not illegal behavior here in Connecticut. So when we look back at our numbers, there was very small amount of people that were calling saying that they had issues with sports betting or online casino gambling, even though we know that people had issues, but they are less likely to admit to an illegal activity. So they might just say, oh, I just have a gambling problem, and leave it at that. And then we would refer them over to resources. And then we also track lottery, and then other would be like cryptocurrency, gaming, investing, horse racing. So we do have other different categories as well. One statistic I do like to point out is that 51% of our callers, and this has been consistent for 2024 and 2023, are under the age of 35. So our demographic is shifting to a younger demographic. I would say probably males 25 to 35, but that's not to exclude females either, because we do get a significant amount of calls from females too. But when I used to work in a treatment program, the majority of my clients were in their 50s or 60s coming to treatment for the first time. Now we're seeing 25-year-olds, 26-year-olds reaching out to the helpline and being engaged in treatment services at a much earlier age, which is great because it's earlier intervention. So hopefully they don't have to have 20 or 30 years of negative consequences related to their gambling before they reach out to help. But it's also kind of discouraging that people at such a young age are feeling like they've had so many negative impacts because of gambling. And I think that also speaks to the accessibility and the ease. 28% of our callers were referred to Gamblers Anonymous, like Stephen had mentioned that program, or Gam-Anon, which would be for the family members. I'll have Stephen talk about self-exclusion shortly. 74% of our callers are calling for themselves. 14% report some kind of co-occurring concern. The top two are anxiety and depression related to their gambling. And then this one always shocks me because we do offer it through chat and text, but still 82% of our contacts are reaching out by calling. Even with a younger demographic, they're still picking up on the phone, where I would have thought that they would be more likely to chat or text with us. So we're continuing to track that as well. We do a community survey on gambling. This is a snippet. So if anybody has any health or wellness fairs or any other activities that are coming up at your organization or in your community, we come out and do resource tables. We do community surveys that are anonymous surveys. We usually give out gift cards for people who participate. And really what we like to try to track is like, what is going on with our community when it comes to gambling? You know, what kind of gambling are they participating in? So this looks a little bit different than the data that we were collecting on the helpline. But 20% are reporting sports betting, including fantasy sports, with 21% reporting lottery scratch-off tickets. And then video games where you purchase skins or loot boxes was the third highest. And we do these at all different kinds of events, veterans events, recovery-specific events, a lot of college campuses. The majority of our data do come from college campuses. We've done them at high schools. And the community survey, if anybody is interested, I'm happy to share that information too, has a lot of demographic information, maybe asking questions like, has anyone ever asked you if you had a gambling problem? Like if you went to the doctor, like for a physical, they asked, do you feel safe in your house? Are you drinking too much? Are you using alcohol? Have you felt depressed or loss of interest, right? So I would say very, very rarely are they ever asking about someone's gambling behavior. And then it also includes those 9 questions from the Problem Gambling Severity Index. So here, right, a healthcare provider included a doctor or nurse ever asked you about your gambling. Almost 84% of the people who answered this survey had said absolutely not. And then going back to the Problem Gambling Severity Index, again, 0, non-problem gambling, 1 to 2 is low. 3 to 7 moderate, and I would say 7 or 8, 9 would be problem gambling with negative consequences. We had almost 10% of our people who completed the survey answering 8 or more, which shows that the community that we're surveying is at a significantly increased risk compared to the national data or even the state data saying that 1.8% would meet the clinical criteria for gambling disorder, because of the people who took the survey, almost 10% of them would. So remembering we're doing college students, veterans, recovery community. So they're already some at-risk populations anyway, but just interesting information. We do have responsible gambling campaigns. So Stephen did give you the definition early on about what responsible gambling is. So this was a partnership with our organization, as well as the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, Problem Gambling Services, and all of our industry partners, really to discuss what is responsible play, how can you keep gambling safer, what are some tips? So that would be including like setting a budget, sticking to it, not gambling when you're under the influence of other substances, understanding how the games and the odds work, gambling only for entertainment. So that goes along with the budget too. So if somebody was to just use this gambling as entertainment, maybe you like to go out to dinner once a month and you set aside $100, right? So when you go to a restaurant and you spend that $100, you're not expecting to get the money back. You're spending that money to enjoy a nice meal and a night out. So if you think of gambling in the same way that you're setting aside $100, however often, to have a good time, and you're not using gambling for all of the other reasons like chasing your losses and escape, you're more likely to remain in that social gambling on the continuum. So there's more information if you visit responsibleplayct.org. And I'll have Stephen talk about self-exclusion. You're on mute again. Sorry.
I keep turning it off because I'm coughing and I don't want everybody to hear me cough. So anyway, we do have a lot of literature, the responsible play literature and other program literature. So at some point, if you do, like Kaitlin said, you can request some of the literature from the clearinghouse, or some of the other stuff. If I'm in your area and you wanted some stuff for your program, I could at some point drop it off. So anyway, so there's numerous ways for folks to voluntarily self-exclude from gambling in Connecticut. And so one of the ways we have here's the self-exclusion portal, which explains what voluntary self-exclusion is, how can it be helpful, and how do you do it. So for the online gambling, on the three apps that Connecticut has, FanDuel, DraftKings, and Fanatics, for those in-state gambling, the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services and CCPG, they do have a link for the voluntary self-exclusion on their website. And what it is someone puts their name in it, their information, and then they're asked to pick how long they want to self-exclude for, 1 year, 5 years, or lifetime, and then they make their selection. This process takes about less than 10 minutes for them to do, and then they submit it. And so once they submit it, whatever they select is what they select. So if they pick a year, they can't go back like the next day or later on that day. I changed my mind. 5 years, same thing, lifetime, same thing. So this is just for the in-state in Connecticut gambling apps. And for the casinos, the brick and mortar casinos, for Foxwoods and Mohegan Sun, those are both tribal casinos. They each have their own individual forms to self-exclude from them individually. And there is a link on this as well for the forms to do that. So when someone wants to self-exclude from them, they have to print out the form. They have to get a passport photo. They have to have it notarized, and they mail it to the address on the form, usually the security office at each casino. So that's for the brick and mortar ones. And sometimes folks will exclude from the brick and mortar casinos, but they still go there to gamble. Chances are, sometimes they will, they'll get missed, they won't get noticed. But if they have a significant win where they have to sign for it, they can't collect their winnings. So I just want to mention that. And then I don't know if there's a slide for the other options, Kaitlin, as far as bet blocker. Okay,
No.
So one of the things we do see, there's a lot. Before the gambling was legalized in Connecticut, there was a lot of offshore sites or kind of illegal betting sites, and so folks could gamble on them, which are still around today. So there is some software that folks can purchase, like for instance, Bet Blocker or Gamban, for a small monthly fee. They can download that software on their electronic devices. It'll stop any kind of gambling on their phone. I mean, these are just tools that can help. There's ways around a lot of this stuff. Smart gambler may figure it out, especially young people, but it gives people pause and they have to think about what they're going to do. And they can be effective. So it is a good tool, especially with the online gambling in Connecticut. We talked about, how accessibility, and it's just unbelievable. So there's the self-exclusion. A lot of people, thousands of people have used this already. I don't know what the number is, Kaitlin, over 3,000 maybe?
Now it's over 6,000.
Oh,
I just got the
6,000. Oh,
update.
well,
Yes,
yeah. So that's a lot.
6,344 was the
That's a
number as of
lot.
yesterday.
So it just goes to show the prevalence of gambling. And that's just people identifying that are reaching out for help, not all the other ones that still need it. So.
And then I'm just going to go through the resources really quick because I am mindful of time and I want to leave a few times for questions if anybody has them. We also just put out a new campaign with the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, so you find out on their website, as well as Responsible Play CT, but it's called Know the Risks. So this has downloadable posters, social media shareables, there's toolkits, and this is all information based on that impact prevalence study that I had shared earlier. And so there's different statistics on there. We actually just launched a multicultural problem gambling prevention program over the last couple of months. So we were able to work with 5 different community organizations and give them each $25,000 to increase awareness of gambling related harm in their specific communities. So the communities and populations that were identified were Black, BIPOC population, Latino, Asian American, LGBTQIA+, and veteran. So those are the 5 that came directly from the impact study. We do know that there's so many other at-risk populations, so we're hoping in the next couple of years that we're going to be able to expand working on that. But we'll be up for we'll put out the proposal sometime in April or May for the next year. So if anybody works with any specific populations and are looking for grant funding to infuse gambling into your work, let me know and we're happy to share the information with you. There's a lot of different prevention initiatives that are happening. So I just shared a little bit about the multicultural problem gambling prevention program. We partner with Fox 61 Student News, so we offer something called Not Just a Game Award, and so high school students are able to pick some kind of topic related to gambling and do a 30-second news story on it. So if you follow Fox 61, you might see some of our student news stories as they're starting to come in, and we do a big red carpet showcase award event in June. So it's really nice to get young people involved. Same with the Gambling Awareness Youth Media Project. We are currently working with 11 middle school and high school student youth groups, and they learn as much as they possibly can about gambling, and then they create public service announcements. They pick up their own slogan, their target audience, their messaging, and then they do all the acting and writing the scripts. So that's really cool. March is Problem Gambling Awareness Month. So March 26th, if you go to ccpg.org, you can find all the upcoming events and trainings that we have. But we're going to be doing a virtual showcase on that day. So all 11 of the groups will be showcasing their PSAs. That's open and free to whoever would like to attend. And then over the last 3 years, we've had a college campus initiative. So this year we're working with 12 universities here in Connecticut, some community colleges, some college universities. And what they do is they take some of our grant funding. Each college university gets $5,000, and then they increase awareness. So they've done screening days. They've updated policies on campus, faculty and student trainings. They hold big events. So the picture here is actually at Sacred Heart University from a few years ago. They brought in Craig Carton to do a big event to talk to the students. So it's just really nice to be able to work with young people and help them to understand that gambling is not a risk-free activity. And then over the last 6 months, we also launched a new Department of Corrections program. So we have our community engagement manager, Brian Hatch, who also runs in All in Addicted Gamblers podcast, if anybody's looking for a podcast. But he's been able to go into 3 different prisons here in Connecticut, provide gambling education, as well as recovery support groups weekly. So we're really excited to see how that program evolves. I talked a lot about the helpline. This is how you can find us. So again, call, chat, or text. And all of our information is also on our website. And I'll turn it over to Stephen to go through the rest of the resources quickly.
Thanks, Kaitlin. So here's our resource van. It can be you can if anybody has an event at one of your programs, you can go on Kaitlin's website and look under resources on CCPG's website. And there's a calendar if you want to reserve it. It explains, you can see if it's available on that particular date, and it just tells you how to request it. It's loaded with resources. We have surveys on there, gambling literature, swag. A lot of times we do surveys for swag type things or gift cards, depending on the event. So it's a great resource for the community. Yeah, we already have like over 20 events booked so far for the March and April. So great resource for you folks too. Again, here's my Better Choice program. This is what it looks like at my treatment program. So we have outpatient services in Connecticut for located Region 5. We do provide telehealth for some of our services because like for family support group, because not a lot of the other programs provide that. So we do engage people statewide for that. And again, treatment offered in Waterbury, Danbury, Torrington, and Milford. So I know there were people on Torrington on here as well. So we cover a big area. And again, we have family, individual and family therapy, group treatment, peer support, medication management, financial counseling. We're highly trained. And we have to update this slide, but we have 4 groups. We have a woman's specific gambling support group. We have a family support group. We have a co-ed support group, and we have a long-term recovery support group and ongoing gambling recovery support services. And there's no cost treatment options available. So we do have a grant. If someone doesn't have insurance for whatever reason, our grant will cover treatment. And if they do have insurance, but whatever their co-pays are, our grant covers the co-pays. And our services are open-ended. Our folks can come to our program as long as they want. I think our longest client has been around for over 18 years. So whether seeing a therapist or peer support group, it's like kind of it's not a cookie cutter type thing. So again, we're probably one of the largest programs in the Northeast or even farther out. So, and again, another grant that I manage, the Gambling Recovery Support Services. So this is statewide. The van does come under that, but we do a lot of outreach and training like this or going around the treatment programs, myself or my staff, talking to clients. We have recovery speakers, for meetings or trainings. We do it at the Speakers Bureau. We prep the individuals. We have scholarships for CCAR Recovery Coach Academy for folks that are in recovery or affected from gambling, and recovery sports specialist training at Advocacy Unlimited. And again, connecting people to leaking treatment and recovery support services or meetings, and provide training for behavioral health agencies and kind of a million other things. So that we do. And again, here's the 5 regions in Connecticut, the DEMIS regions, treatment providers around the state. Region 1 is Connecticut Renaissance, Region 2 Communicare, UCFS, and Region 3, the Norwich area, Wheeler Clinic in the Hartford area, and again, MCCA, my program in the Western Connecticut.
And then we also have regional gambling awareness teams. So these teams, there's one in each region. So depending on where you live or where you work, these teams are made up of treatment providers, prevention specialists, people with lived experience, people who work on college campuses, just regular community members, people that are in GA or Gam-Anon. So it's an opportunity for people to come together to collaborate on all things gambling. So sometimes we host events together, do priority reports, things like that. So if you are interested, if this information interests you and you want to get more involved, please reach out and I'll be happy to connect you to your regional gambling awareness team coordinator. They're all amazing. They also do trainings all the time, and then they come out and do in-person or virtual trainings too. For professional workforce development, this could be a whole training within itself. I'm actually doing it as part of our clinical training series in a couple weeks. But there are a few clinical certifications. So for our clinicians on here, I mentioned I'm an internationally certified gambling counselor. So through the IGCCB, which actually just changed their name to IPGGC, but you can go to their website and find out all the different criteria. We run a 30-hour clinical training series, which is totally free and virtual. We do it every year. So we're wrapping that up in 2 weeks as our last session. And then we'll hopefully do it again in the fall. So if anybody's interested in learning more and getting involved and becoming certified, I'm happy to support you in supervision as well as providing the training. So those are just the different levels of different types of certification. With the certification, there's also a Connecticut specific certification, which is a specialty competency certificate in problem gambling through the Connecticut Certification Board. So the only difference is the international one, you have an exam, and the Connecticut one, you don't. But you do have to have 4 hours of clinical supervision with someone who is a board approved clinical consultant. So I am one, so I do individual supervision, but we also have an amazing colleague, Fred Feta, who works over at the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, and he does case consultation calls twice a month. So anybody can jump on those calls. 1 week they do a specific topic, so everybody's contributing to what's going on. A lot of our gambling specific treatment providers are on there. And then there's a case consultation. So again, you don't necessarily have to participate by sharing a case, but you can just join in and listen and obtain the information if you want to learn more about gambling clients. And then for those who join our regional gambling awareness teams, if you have 25 hours of gambling specific treatment CEUs, you can also earn a 25-hour gambling certificate of competency. Again, happy to answer any questions if people want to reach out if this is something that you're interested in. And again, the clinical training series, we're just about done, but we will hopefully be offering it again in the fall. And then this is a lot of resources for support and information. Again, I know I talk really fast and threw a lot of information at you. Happy to share the slides, happy to stay on for a few minutes and answer any questions. But you can access my website there, Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling, the Responsible Play the CT Way. That's where you can book the resource van that Stephen mentioned. We also have a Connecticut Gaming and Gambling website that's really youth focused, talks about the convergence between gaming and gambling. And if that's a topic, I'm always happy to come back and do another training about that. There's Stephen's contact information about recovery support services. And then we mentioned DEMIS a lot, Gamblers Anonymous, Gam-Anon, and then we're also affiliates of the National Council on Problem Gambling. So if you go to their website, there's a lot of different resources that are available. And then on the side here, we have a few other resources. So there's one that's a small picture Gamban, which is like Bet Blocker, like Stephen had mentioned, and then some other financial tools. And then the All In Addicted Gamblers podcast that I had mentioned that has many, many great, amazing episodes. So highly recommend checking that out. And then here's our contact information. I'm sure, Darcy, you probably have an evaluation to do the CEUs. We also just do an internal evaluation because we like to know your own feedback. What did you get What are you interested in learning more about? So if you wouldn't mind scanning the QR code and answering a few questions, or you can go to the link. I can also stop sharing my screen and put the link in the chat too, if you wouldn't mind filling that out. And with that, I want to thank you for inviting us to speak today, and thank everybody for your attention this afternoon. Hopefully this was useful information, and if you have any questions, we are here.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is that
Breaking up, Annie?
So I'm having issues hearing. I don't know if it's just me or.
No, couldn't, it's just breaking up.
Annie, if you unplug it and plug it back in, it'll work better.
I do see a question in there from Anne Marie. Is the responsible play the gambling harm reduction view? So kind of, sort of. So responsible play, the responsible gambling is more of an industry term. So that's what they use. We would use more of a harm reduction model in treatment. So Stephen, I'll have you talk about that. But, you know, the prevention message is more of like the know the risk campaign, knowing that gambling is an addictive product, that it's not risk-free. And then harm reduction would be more of the treatment side. So Stephen, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about what that looks like.
Sure. So harm reduction, you know, sometimes folks will come to us and maybe they're thinking about stopping or they want to try and control their gambling. And so we'll work with them. Obviously, we're not going to refuse them treatment. So we'll try to come up with a plan limiting the amount of time, frequency, and money they spend, try to stick with it. And you know, very rare cases with extreme oversight of finances with a family member, you know, it can be helpful, but more often than not, we find that it's just a stage of change where, you know, they realize it's not working for them and they're still experiencing some gambling related harm and they need to make more changes. So, and we guide them through that process. So.
There is a question in the chat from Eleanor asking, are persons with certain types of mental health diagnoses more at risk than others?
Yes, yeah. So I would say there definitely is. I don't have the statistics on it, but what we see are people that are diagnosed with like ADHD are at an increased risk. Those who are diagnosed with personality disorders, anxiety, and depression. So I would say across the board, if you have a mental health issue, the likelihood of you developing a gambling problem is also pretty high. And then going back to the substance use disorders and the risk replacement behaviors. There's a lot of times people stop drinking or using substances and then they replace it with gambling and vice versa. So we do see that often.
And sometimes folks that do have mental health diagnosis or other health issues, like even like bipolar, maybe Medicaid or Parkinson's, certain medications for those disorders can cause impulsive behavior. Like, you know, Abilify is one, a few other medications for restless leg, things like those medications can increase impulsivity. So if you are working with someone with gambling disorder, it's always important to find out, you know, if they have those diagnoses, what they're taking, and because we've had clients that, you know, struggle, those medications have affected them.
So if there aren't any other questions or comments, then I'm just going to put my email back in the chat again. So if anybody wants the slides or has additional questions, wants me to expand, I'm happy to set up a time to chat with you if people want to get more involved. But thank you so much for having both of us today.
Eleanor did come back with another question asking, are there medications that can help one reduce, it just moved, hold on a second, reduce their gambling?
Yes, so there's naltrexone, which has been used to help decrease cravings associated with gambling. So it's not FDA approved specifically for gambling cravings or urges, but it has been successful. And then I don't know how much people have been reading, and I don't know much research, but I have seen a few articles that there's discussion about the medication Ozempic being used to help curb cravings for substances as well as gambling. So I don't know too much research behind that, but it makes sense of if it's curbing your appetite and suppressing that part of the brain, why it would also help with other areas. But in our treatment programs, the primary medication that would be prescribed is naltrexone.
Yeah, there's another, and again, obviously naltrexone, Vivitrol, the once a month, there is a supplement that Dr. Mark Potenza talks about. He's a leader in the field of problem gambling. N-acetylcysteine, it's like an amino acid. You can purchase over the counter or online, and it does have some effect on craving. It can have some effects to help people, cut the cravings for gambling.
Well, thank you, Kaitlin and Stephen. This has been very informative. I know you're getting a lot of positive feedback in the chats. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. I
Thank
hope you
you.
enjoy your afternoon.
You too. Bye, you guys.